It's no secret that many students struggle with balance, and while there are many different techniques and ways that you can help them improve, there is one tool that we often use to help our students in a balance, such as Warrior 3, that ultimately in the long run is not really supporting them in developing their ability to balance at all. So I'm going to show you a modification that I like to give my students that helps to make a Warrior 3 more accessible. And when I'm talking about what accessible yoga is, I'm not talking about temporarily being able to make a shape or access what resembles the look of a pose. I'm talking about making a pose accessible for a long period of time. And that might mean that there is a stepping back that your student is required to do, which is what I'm going to show you in a Warrior 3, in order for them to approach this in a way that is more in alignment with their longevity. So generally what we're doing when we're getting our students to come into a Warrior 3 and we're seeing either they're struggling, or sometimes we don't even see that they're struggling, we're simply just offering them the option of putting the hands on a block even if it's not needed. What I like to address first and foremost with my students is the importance of them not relying on using a block, not relying on touching the floor. So usually we're giving a block because maybe they're not able to touch the hands on the ground. Perhaps as teachers, we're really wanting to consider the fact that getting all the way down to the ground to put their hands on the ground is just not possible for a lot of people. So this helps to raise the floor up. It makes sense, right? But the thing is that if our students are able to come down to this degree to be able to touch a block, that's where the problem lies. The problem exists within how low they are going into the pose, and that's why we usually have to give a block. But what happens when we give them a block is there's actually a lot of disengagement. And it's not to say that a student can't be using a block in something like a Warrior 3 and still be finding engagement, but what naturally switches things on to create the improvement in their stability is to not go so low, number one, and not have to rest on anything, number two. Now, this is different than like a light touch or a little tap if needed. However, even with that, it's really important to remember that one's ability to recalibrate their balance is something that improves the balance. The balance is not just good when nothing is challenging it. So if your student is already very challenged by balance, this modification that I'm going to show you will help that. And if they're not necessarily very challenged by balance, but when they get down into that position of Warrior 3 where the leg is lifting and the body is coming down, in order to be able to reach the floor or in order to be able to touch a block, and that's where they're challenged by the balance, well, again, we're looking at what's required to support the body in their balance, and that is the structural integrity. So they need to be in some capacity a little bit challenged within their balance to have the body respond, because the body's response in terms of its activation to support us, to prevent us from falling out of the balance, is part of what improves the balance. So we need to support our students in having a little bit of wobbly experiences in something like Warrior 3 in order for the body to start to switch on, for the body to start to respond and understand what is required for it to actually balance. So let's get to the modification. The thing that I have found to be the most helpful is how I get my students into a Warrior 3. And one of the most difficult things that I think we can get our students to do in terms of an entry is to go from down to lifting up into the balance. And what I mean by that is, say we have our students here or something like that. We sequence them to lift the back knee, and then maybe we get them to slide that foot in, and then we get them to come into the balance. So they're really having to lift up against gravity. It's very common that the chest is collapsed, and they are going to have a hard time pulling back away from doing that. pulling back from that tendency to round, especially if they have been told that they should be touching a block. Then all of a sudden, unless the block is up here, they're rounding their spine oftentimes to try and get down there. And this is not really doing them any favors. Yeah, maybe they can get the look of the pose, but they're really missing out on a lot of the functional benefits of the pose. So instead of getting them to go from down to up, you get them to enter into their warrior three from up to down, only to the point in which they can do it without having to support themselves with the block or the floor. You're going to get them to first transfer the weight gradually off of that back foot. You want to make sure there's some buoyancy in this standing leg, because the buoyancy is what activates the stabilizer muscles to support the body in the balance. And there is an ability to recalibrate and respond. When we have this leg straight, there's not a lot of give and take in the ocean. It's like really rigid, really kind of stuck, and then any kind of wind that comes just pushes your students over. So they need to have, first of all, this buoyancy in the standing leg. So we've got a weight transfer gradually off the back foot. We've got the buoyancy in the standing leg. And then from there, we've got the full weight transfer where the leg is lifted, coupled with an extension of the chest, pressing the chest forward here, not exaggerated in a back bend, but just enough to acknowledge and to remedy the tendency to collapse and round as a student might go down. So we've got the transfer of the weight, a little lift of the back foot, a little lift of the chest, some buoyancy in the standing leg. And if your student is able to find some balance here, then you get them to move and explore further on from that. So from there, you would just simply get them to tip and pause. And if the balance is accessible there, then they can go again. Back leg lifts, chest is slightly forward, tip and lift the back leg, pause. And again, chest slightly forward, buoyancy in the standing leg, lift, tip, and pause. And maybe if they were to go a little bit further, this is where they feel like they have to round, they need support on the block. Maybe the strength within the body, particularly the standing leg in that tipped position, is not something that is quite developed in their body. So it does not make sense for them to go further to reach something down on the ground, even if it is a block or a few blocks stacked up. They actually don't need it. What they need is to go slower into the entry, to gradually build up the weight transfer, to gradually develop the muscles and the structural stability that's required for them to do something like a warrior three. But the thing is that people want to rush. They want it now. They don't want to wait. They don't want to do these things. So as a teacher, this is really where you need to empower them to understand the benefits of taking this slowly and not just trying to go and look like someone else who maybe doesn't need a block or is able to access this with a little bit more ease in their body. So again, the process is moving from up into that position, only going as low as they can balance for. If the balance is compromised, then they are not moving any further forward. Maybe that means they need to stay here, okay? Maybe that's the case. Now, I'm gonna go to one little caveat, which is, what if you have someone who at the moment that they transfer the weight forward, they lift their back foot off, they lose their balance, okay? We're gonna work on the same kind of rules and principles, but we're just going to add one little modification, and that would be that the weight transfer is more of what it is that they're focusing on rather than the back leg lifting. So it would be the same things, buoyancy in the standing leg, the chest comes forward, the weight transfers, and maybe there's a little pickup of the back leg, okay? And then from there, if they start to do this, and that's where things start to wobble, they can drop the foot down and then they can just extend and reach a little bit forward. Then maybe, again, they're transferring the weight and the back leg begins to, and if they do that, then the back leg can go down and they can just take a moment to pause. So it's not as if we can't use that back leg. That back leg lifting and lowering to the ground is going to be far more beneficial for your students to use as a prop than lowering the torso down to touch the block or the floor. It's much, much better that they use their back leg in order to build the stability than rely on something that's down on the ground in front of them to lean into. Now, you can use the block, and I do sometimes, as a little temporary tool, as like a touch point. But if you have someone who's going so low to the point that they're not able to hold themselves up anymore and they have to use a block, they've gone too low. It's plain as day. You can see that the body cannot support them in that exploration of range, and therefore a block simply becomes a band-aid, a short-term fix, and as teachers, we really need to think about the long-term gains that we can provide our students with. So give this a try in your classes, ditch the block, it's not needed. If you're invested in helping your students build stability and structure in their body, longevity, strength, then make this adaptation in a Warrior 3, and your students will greatly benefit from this in the long run, even though they might feel a little bit flustered. But this is part of our job as a teacher, to support them through these things that we know are going to be a lot more optimal for them and their long-term health and well-being. Let me know if you have any questions about this in the comments. Make sure you like this video if you found it valuable, and subscribe to my channel for more yoga teaching tips just like this.